What's up, duelists? Now, if you've played Edison format before, then you know that trap cards play a pivotal role, and there are a ton of really powerful trap cards in this format. A large part of this format is reading your opponent's back row, playing around certain back row, giving yourself the best opportunities to win, and then also leveraging your back row as additional plays you can make in a turn because the format is a bit slower than your average modern Yu-Gi-Oh format. Today, I'm going to do as good a job as possible of ranking all of the trap cards in this format, basically just the top 20. I'm going to rank the top 20. There's a few honorable mentions in here, but I'm going to talk about why I think these are the best trap cards in the format, why I think these are the cards that you need to understand if you want to play Edison format or if you want to build decks in Edison format, and that's pretty much it. If you guys like this type of content, don't forget to like, subscribe. If I forgot a trap card that you think is good, I probably didn't, but if I forgot one, leave a comment below, and let's get right into things. First things first, honorable mentions. I just want to go over these 7 cards. They didn't quite make the list for various reasons, and I'll tell you each of the reasons. Trap Stun, I think this card is good, but there's a card on the list that is better, spoiler alert, than Trap Stun that does functionally the same thing. I think Trap Stun is a good card. I think it's got niche applications in certain decks, but we haven't really seen it have too much success outside of a few tops here and there, and it just doesn't do what it does the best. Does that make sense? There's a card that does what it does better. I think that's the issue with Trap Stun. Imperial Iron Wall, this card is really good. It's a floodgate that stops a lot of popular strategies. Banishing cards is a large part of the game, actually, and it's also a good way to counter a lot of back row as well, but I think it's just a bit too narrow of a card. The most popular card in the format is Caius the Shadow Monarch, and while this does counter Caius the Shadow Monarch, it also means you can't play Caius the Shadow Monarch, so you're kind of at a disadvantage from using it inherently by restricting your own deck building, which is an issue with Imperial Iron Wall. But that being said, the decks that do want it do play it, and it's very strong. There are some matchups that it just outright wins the game. Pulling the Rug, this card is largely a sideboard card. I think it's a very good sideboard card. Again, one of the most popular monsters in the format is Caius the Shadow Monarch, and Pulling the Rug counters that effectively. I think this card is worth mentioning on this list, but I do not think it makes it into my top 20. Needle Ceiling, comparable to some of the other trap cards on this list, the top trap cards on this list. It's great in a couple of matchups. It's a great sideboard card, but it just doesn't quite make the cut. It's not really main deckable, and I think that that's the biggest issue with this card, is that it's not main deckable, and it's a little bit too inactive. You can't use it early, which is kind of an issue with Needle Ceiling. Magic Cylinder, this card's fantastic. It's used in burn decks or aggro decks. Decks like Ancient Gear have topped main decking it before. I think this card is good. I think Magic Cylinder is actually very underrated in Edison format. I just think that there's oftentimes a better card to have set. A lot of removal spells are, generally speaking, going to be better more often than Magic Cylinder. It's great late game, obviously, and it's one of the few trap cards that can immediately win you the game, but yeah, same thing with Ceasefire. It's not on here, but similar thing. Gravity Bind, similar to Imperial Iron Wall, the card is very, very powerful, and it shuts off a lot of the top decks in the format. But that being said, you also shut off your own deck, so it's very much a two-edged sword. And then Reinforced Truth, I have to mention this card because it is just so incredibly powerful, but it's only incredibly powerful in one deck, which is the Gemini deck. And I don't know if you guys have seen that, but you can find videos of Reinforced Truth in the Gemini deck on my channel, so go ahead and check those videos out if you're interested in seeing why Reinforced Truth is on this honorable mentions list at all. Alright, number 20, top 20 trap cards in Edison format. Number 20, Eradicator Epidemic Virus. This card is insanely busted. It is so insanely busted. That being said, it can only be played in a couple of decks. There are some decks that can take advantage of this, like Norlaris decks, Dragon decks, the Dark Fairy Valhalla decks. Blackwings can play this if they also play Solidarity. Blackwings can play this even if they don't play Solidarity because of Kollut and Siroko's effect. There's some decks that can synchro into Dark Monsters very, very freely, like Flamvel can make Thought Ruler Archfiend, which is an Eradicator target, very freely. There are some decks that can take more advantage of this than others, but it's obviously a very powerful card, right? You just get to destroy your opponent's hand, you get to destroy their back row, you get to destroy their draws for 3 turns. That's just That's a ridiculous effect. If you resolve this, you're usually winning the game immediately. That's just how it goes. In the right matchup, of course, and obviously you have to know whether to call Spell or Trap in the matchup. It does take a little bit of knowledge. It does take a little bit of build around, but yeah, easily a top 20 trap card for me in this format. I couldn't make a top 20 list without including it. That being said, it doesn't see a ton of play, so I can't really put it higher than 20th. But I do think that it is a fair bit better than everything on the honorable mentions list in terms of like raw power level. Nothing on the honorable mentions list outside of like Imperial Iron Wall, technically Magic Cylinder in some situations. Nothing on the honorable mentions list will outright win you the game. Eradicator Epidemic Virus will outright win you the game. Like the second it's live, it just ends the game. So yeah, it's got to be number 20 for me on this list. Number 19, Reckless Greed. This card has recently seen some success. It's a little bit late into the meta for this card, for a card this strong to be seeing so much success. But yeah, it recently won RBET in the hands of Ghost Rider in his Dragon Turbo deck. It topped a PS5 tournament in a Blackwing deck recently. It's just a really, really strong card. I mean, just one card, draw two cards. If you're winning the game that turn, then the downside's not real. And then if you have multiple of these, like they stack really, really nicely. Let's say you activate two of them in the end phase, you get to draw 4 cards, right? But then you're only skipping the next 2 draw phases. They don't add additional draw phases if you activate them in the same turn. So if you have 2 or even 3 of these, you can end up with like a massive advantage, and you're only behind like 1 or 2, or you're only behind 2 draw phases, obviously. So yeah, it's insane in multiples. It's really good in some of the best decks of the format, Dragons and Blackwings. I consistently rate Dragons and Blackwings in the top 3 decks of the format. So I think that any trap card that does well in those decks in particular is just an auto include for the top 20 list. Obviously, it doesn't see as much play as some of the other trap cards that we'll see later on, but in terms of inherent power level and in terms of the decks that it goes in, it is definitely one of the strongest and top 20 trap cards in the format. You do need to know about it. You do need to consider it every time you're building a deck, basically. All right, next, number 18, we've got Compulsory Evacuation Device. Check this out. Check out this beautiful OCG Ultimate Rare Compulsory Evacuation Device. I didn't even know this existed until recently. It is an absolutely gorgeous card. If you see it in person, it's even more beautiful than this picture does it justice. This card's fantastic. I played it at Nats. I know a lot of people play this to like top finishes. The reason it's so low on this list, I think, is because it's normally a sideboard card. It's not normally a card that you can main deck because it is inherently a -1. Now, in certain metagames, obviously, Compulsory Evacuation Device is going to be one of the best trap cards, but it depends on the metagame a little bit. It's a little meta dependent. More often than not, you're going to see this card in the sideboard. It is main deckable. It is really, really good in the situations where it's really, really good, but it's not always amazing. You know, sometimes your compulsory is like you're bouncing a monster and then you're just going down -1 because you're going to lose that monster next turn. On low resource situations, Compulsory Evacuation Device is almost always worse than a hard removal spell, unless your opponent is going for like a Vayu Synchro or a Miracle Fusion or something like that. And also, like I did mention earlier, the most popular monster in the format, or one of the most popular monsters in the format, is Caius the Shadow Monarch. And Compulsory Evacuation Device does not match up well against Caius the Shadow Monarch. They'll play Caius, they'll banish one of your cards, you'll compulsory the Caius, they play it again, they banish another one of your cards, and all of a sudden you're down like 3 cards, and you're just like, how do I win this game? So yeah, there are some pretty popular cards it doesn't really match up super well against, but I can't deny the power of this card. Later in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, it does end up getting limited to 1 because of how powerful it is. I think it is one of the strongest cards in the format for sure, and it definitely deserves a spot, in my opinion, on the top 20 list, despite its shortcomings in a few areas. Number 16, we're moving pretty quick. 16, no, number 17. I skipped one. Did I skip one? No, I didn't. This is number 17. All right, that was number 18. Number 17, Dust Tornado. Again, sideboard card. You know, strong card. Really, really strong card. A lot of like cool combos you can do with this card. I'm going to take this segment to talk about some of the cool combos you can do with Dust Tornado. Let's say you have another powerful card in your hand that you need to get set, like perhaps Return from the Different Dimension, right? But you don't want to expose it to your opponent's back row or to their Heavy Storm or their Space Typhoon on their turn. So you just set your Dust Tornado, end phase, you Dust Tornado them, and then you can use that as an opportunity to safely set your Return from the Different Dimension so it's not going to get blown up on their main phase. And then on your turn, you can basically activate the return from the different dimension. That's like standard Dust Tornado setting up your power trap. Additionally, you can use Dust Tornado to set field spells over other field spells. You can use this to set a Gear Town over another Gear Town. To end phase, special summon an Ancient Gear Dragon on your opponent's turn. There's a bunch of different unique applications in Dust Tornado. You can use it to make your opponent's Gear Town miss timing as long as you set something, because it says destroy one spell or trap card on your opponent's side of the field. Then you can set one spell or trap. So as long as you set something, you can make your opponent's Gear Towns miss timing. It's a good card. It's a really good card. It's a utility card. Obviously, it's not as good as Mystical Space Typhoon because that card is a spell card, and spell cards are faster and better than trap cards. But it does have a lot of application. It does make it so that back row decks aren't entirely dominant because it gives you at least 3 additional spot removal spells versus back row decks. And it has a lot of cool, like, unique combos. I think it definitely warrants a top 20 slot, even though it's like not the most powerful trap card. It is versatile, and it fills a role that a lot of decks do need, and it also combats a lot of trap cards on this list. So yeah, pretty strong card, definitely worth the top 20 inclusion, and probably if you do play Edison format, a card you're going to want to own a playset of, just because there are so many decks that want it for their side deck. All right, now we're on to number 16, I believe. Yes, number 16, Treacherous Trap Hole. This card is very double-edged in a sense that it only goes in decks that only want one trap card. That being said, this card, in terms of like raw power level, is so strong. Like, compared to most of the other trap cards on this list, this is probably one of the strongest trap cards on this list. The only issue with it, obviously, is the inherent, you can't have any trap cards in your graveyard to activate it. So obviously, you can't play it alongside a lot of other trap cards unless you risk inconsistency, right? So at most, you'll see it with like 1 or 2 other trap cards in the builds. Usually, it's the only trap card in the build. You want to play this in decks like Frogs, decks like maybe Norlaris, decks like, I don't know, any sort of deck that's on like triple Book of Moon. I have a Flamvel list that plays this card. I think this card is very interesting. If you're playing cards like Soul Release, there's something that I've considered. You can Soul Release to banish your own trap cards. I've also considered decks with like Banisher of the Light. I think it's Banisher of the Radiance. It's Banisher of the Radiance is what I'm thinking of. And this card as well in multiples because they'll never hit the graveyard. But I'm not really sure if that's like gimmicky or like realistic. The issue with that too is like your opponent will just start playing around Treacherous Trap Hole if you have multiples of them. Kind of the danger of this card is that if you have only the one, your opponent can never really choose to play around it, right? Like they always have to play into that one. Because it's just too high risk to not play around. Like let's say you have Book of Moons and Treacherous Trap Hole, right? You can have 3 Book of Moons and 1 Treacherous Trap Hole. When your opponent's playing against you, they're always going to take the odds that it's a Book of Moon because they have a 75% chance that it's that. So they'll play into Treacherous Trap Hole as a result, and that's what makes this card so scary and so devastating. Easily warrants a top 20 slot in my opinion. I've lost to this card more than I've lost to a lot of the trap cards on this list actually, just because of how frustrating it is to try and play around it when it's almost always a one of, and yeah, it's just inherently a Regeki in a lot of situations. Even better than a Regeki because it can be done at instant speed, and it can also destroy your own monsters if you need to, like destroy your own Dandelion, get in the grave, destroy your own Goblin Zombie, get a Surge, something like that. Destroy your own Flamvel monster, like whatever basically. It's just a strong card. Yeah, it can help you play around brain control. Like let's say your opponent like summons a tuner, and then they go to brain control your monster. You can Treacherous Trap Hole, blow up both. They don't get to take your monster, and then you also destroy their tuner in the process. It's just a good card, really strong card. All right, next number 15. Number 15 is Ultimate Offering. This card's really good. This card is really good. It's banned nowadays, obviously. Yu-Gi-Oh is very different nowadays than it was in Edison format, but yeah, this card's nuts. A lot of archetypes can take advantage of this card and have done well with it. Zombies is the standout one, and Gemini as well. But I actually have a couple other lists that play Ultimate Offering. I have a Lightsworn Monarch list that plays Ultimate Offering, which is really cool. You can play this card in like a lot of different decks. You can play it in gadgets, you can play it in machine decks, you can play it in hero decks. It's not even that bad. In Diva hero decks, it's pretty good. Anything that has like Caius or like something that searches on the summon or searches when it goes to the graveyard or whatever, this card becomes insane. Or anything that can give you inherent value. Like let's say you have Gemini monsters in your deck. That way you can get 2 like summons worth of value out of a monster, and you can repeatedly use this. I think this card's insane. I think it's insanely powerful. It's definitely stronger than the previous 5 cards on this list, which is why I think it's at this placement. It's also like more versatile and like more main deckable than the other previous 5 cards are. I think this card is going to see a lot more play in the future, and it's definitely something people should consider. It helps you play around some other cards on this list, which I'm sure I'll get into a bit later. It's just a really strong card in general. Can't be understated how powerful this card is. It's a Yugi Kaiba classic. It's been out since literally day one, and it's still one of the best trap cards, I think, in the game and definitely in the format. So, yeah, it's limited to 2. That is kind of a drawback to this card. You can't play the full 3, but it's really, really good. The utility of this card can't be understated. All right, number 14. Number 14, I have Icarus Attack. And I know what you guys are thinking. Keegan, this is super narrow. You can only play it in one deck. You can only play it in decks that have wing beasts, basically. Well, technically, you can play it in a couple of different decks, right? You can play it in Vayu Turbo, Gladiator Beasts, and Black Wings. There's not really that many other wing beast decks that can take advantage of this, besides maybe like Harpy variants, of course. But man, is this card good. This card is basically Treacherous Trap Hole, but it doesn't have like... It has a different drawback, functionally. It has the different deck building restriction, but it lets you play more trap cards, and you can play 3 copies of this. This card is format warping. Like, literally, like, this card defines how we play Edison format. That's why I had to include it at this list, and I had to include it at this point, even though you can't just put it in every deck. It's not a generic inclusion, but it does define the format, and it defines it in a way that's, like, it's definitely worth having it on the top 20 list. It is such a powerful effect. You can destroy your own cards to play around certain things. You can destroy your opponent's cards in the end phase. It's just such a ridiculous effect because it can hit back row. It can hit monsters. Unlike Treacherous Trap Hole, which can only hit monsters, it just lets you play through so much stuff. If your opponent like ever commits like double Dupe Frog, it lets you play through that. If your opponent commits like 2 monsters to try and make a synchro play, you just boom, pop both of those, or pop one of them and then pop their back row, and then all of a sudden they're stuck with like a weak tuner in play. And like, there's so many opportunities to get 3 for 2 with this card. It's not even funny. Like, it's definitely a top 20 trap card in my opinion in this format. That being said, it can only be played in a few decks, so that's why it's not higher on the list. But yeah, format defining, format warping. The next card, similar to Icarus Attack, I feel, Phoenix Wing Windblast. I know that it's not like a direct comparison, but yeah, this card is only played in decks that can really support the discard, which is, I think, a larger number of decks than the decks that can support Icarus Attack, right? This can be played in hero decks, this can be played in machine decks, this can be played in plant decks, zombie decks, so this can definitely be played in a wider variety of things. It can also even be played in the decks that play Icarus Attack, because those decks usually play Vayu, and that's a great discard for Phoenix Wing. So yeah, I've even played Phoenix Wing and Icarus Attack in the same deck. It's a similar card, just spot removal anything. It's a little bit less powerful than Icarus because it's only spot removal 1 card, but it doesn't waste your normal summon, so it's just a better cost to support discarding a card. There isn't like a Sinister Serpent in this format. There isn't like something like that, and you can't... I honestly think you can't play this card in multiples that effectively, because if you draw like 2 or 3 of them and you don't have the Facilitator, then your hand will fall apart pretty easily. And it has a similar issue to Compulsory Evacuation device in that it's terrible against specifically Monarchs. But outside of that, this card is just so ridiculous. Like, it's a full time walk. You cut off your opponent's draw phase. It's like a mini little Yada Lock or mini Time Seal. It can hit set monsters, which is something that a lot of cards can't hit. It can hit back row. Let's say you hit like a trap card that's only live in certain circumstances, and then they draw it a turn later. So it's like functionally killing the back row and their draw phase. You're usually getting a functional 2 for 2 with this card, which is really why it's like similar to Icarus Attack in my opinion. I think this is easily a top 20 trap card in this format. I wanted to put it higher, but the issue is if you draw it without a Facilitator or a card that you want to discard, it is not the best. It's good, don't get me wrong, but like, it's not as good as some of the cards we're going to get into. All right. That was number, 13? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Number 12? 9? No, number 8. Yeah. This was number 13. I think this was not. Yeah, number 13. All right, number 12. Number 12 on the list. Royal Decree. Yeah, this card's nuts. It is semi-limited in Edison format. It has a lot of application in similar decks to the Treacherous Trap Hole decks. Decks that don't really want trap cards. Decks that are kind of like all gas, or they rely more on monster effects and spell cards. Not necessarily Treeborn Frog decks like Treacherous Trap Hole, but I've actually seen it played in Treeborn Frog decks to some success, which is kind of wild. It's just a ridiculous card. It's a card that shuts off usually a third of your opponent's deck, and that is insane. It's kind of like Eradicator Epidemic Virus without the cost, but it does have that like double-edged I can't use trap cards. That being said, you can build around it a little bit easier than you can build around trying to use Eradicator Epidemic Virus. And usually if this card is shutting off like 2 or 3 cards, you're going to win the game. Like, that's just how it goes. Like, if this gets you a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 or a functional 2 or 3-for-1, yeah, you're just going to win the game. And then another like kind of hidden power to Royal Decree, which is why, you know, in the honorable mentions, I mentioned Trap Stun, and I was like, no, it's definitely Royal Decree. You know, Royal Decree is definitely the card that gets included on this list, not Trap Stun. And the reason why is because when you activate Trap Stun, you are usually doing that at -1, right? When you activate Royal Decree, those trap cards are shut off forever. So it's like functional +1s, right? And then on top of that, every trap card your opponent draws after that is also dead. So it shuts off not only trap cards in the moment, but in the future as well, which is why this card is so ridiculously strong. I kind of wanted to place it higher on this list, but there are just too many good trap cards in this format, if I'm being real. But yeah, I think this is definitely one of the stronger trap cards in the format. I think it doesn't get enough love. It doesn't get enough attention. It doesn't get played as much as it probably should. I know Carpath won with his Chaos Fairies with Royal Decree, and he talked about this card a lot, saying how powerful it is. It usually is a Caius Magnet. It forces your opponent to use their spot removal on it, and that way your monsters are free to exist, which is another unique application of this card in terms of like positioning. It's just a really strong card. Really, really strong card. All right. That was number 12, I think. Number 11, Deck Devastation Virus. Fuck this card, man. I fucking hate this card. This is like one of my least favorite cards to play against. This card and Eradicator to a degree, but this card more so than Eradicator because I like to play decks that play like little monsters that have strong effects. Like, to me, that's like a cool deck. Like Fairies or Quick Draw. Those are usually some of the most exciting decks. And this card just says you can't play those decks functionally. This card, yeah, complete blowout against a lot of decks. Gives you a lot of free wins. It's much easier to support than Eradicator Epidemic Virus. Like, those 500 attack points, they matter a lot because all of a sudden now I can sacrifice my Caius. I can go Diva into Catastor. I can sacrifice that. I can summon Sirocco, which is like just a normal summon. You know what I mean? And I can use that to activate Deck Devastation Virus. And those are 3 like cards that, well, Deep Sea Diva and Gilman, like you could fit that into just about any deck. Caius, Sirocco, like you could play those in any deck. If you want to play Deck Devastation Virus, you can just add Divas, Sirocco, and Caius to your deck. And then all of a sudden, you have enough deck dev targets. It's really, really good. It's much more versatile than the other virus. It's much more versatile than stuff like Icarus Attack, in my opinion. It's just one of the most disgusting trap cards in the format. It's part of the reason why dark monsters are so dominant in the format and why most of the top decks include a heavy number of dark monsters. And it also just like punishes you for like building a deck that's weak to it. Like, you literally have to build your deck around this card in the deck building process. It is format warping. It is so disgustingly powerful. Now, the reason it's so low on this list, the reason it's not like a top 1 card, is because if people are building around this card, all of a sudden it kind of sucks. All of a sudden you just sacrificed your big monster and you get nothing out of it. Like, you just hit nothing in your opponent's hand. And when this card does miss, boy, is that justice. Boy, is that the best feeling ever. It's just like, man, yeah, you just sacrificed your monster for nothing, and I get to just run you over now because you sacrificed your big monster, you spent your normal summon to summon it, you spent your trap card to summon it. It's like a hard -2 when it misses. So, sweet justice, sweet justice. If you've ever seen a Deck Devastation Virus miss, that's how you know, and that's why it's kind of a little bit lower on this list. All right, I think we're getting into the top 10. Let me just do a quick count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, we're in the top 10. So number 10, exciting. Write your predictions for number 10 in the comments below. Pause the video, write your predictions right now. What are the top 10 and what's the order? All right. Have you done that? I'm going to move on now. Don't forget to like and subscribe while you're down there too as well. Number 10, Call of the Haunted. This card is insane. It's just a generic reborn on any monster. This card helps you play through the last card we just talked about, Deck Devastation Virus. Helps you play through a lot of other back row on this list. It's just a ridiculous card. You can turn this into a build your own Vanity's Emptiness with Fossil Dyna or Archler Christia. You can play this card in just about any deck, and it's never going to be bad, honestly. Most of the best decks in the format play this card. The only issue with playing this card in some decks is another card we'll get into later on this list, but if it wasn't for that card, every deck would play this card. It's just good. It's just amazing. It's like, bring back your best monster. And this whole format is about setting up your graveyard. You know, this whole format's about like grinding resources and like trading monsters, and when you get that opportunity to just summon back one of your best monsters for free, it's insane. Also, this card combos with one of the premier synchro monsters in the format, Bryonic, Dragon of the Ice Barrier. Once you activated this card, and let's say you synchro with the monster you brought back, to make that Bryonic, you can pitch your worst card and bounce this card back to your hand and then reuse it to summon that Bryonic. It's just insane. Card combos with Jinzo well. It combos with like I mentioned earlier, the cards that stop special summons. This card can bring back like a Dandelion, Chainlink 2, get you some tokens, Sangin, Goblin Zombie, get you a Search. It's just a fantastic, even Dimensional Alchemist, get you an add back. Like, this card is just disgusting. It facilitates a lot of the more like unique and cool plays in the format. A lot of decks like Lightsworn, Christia Sworn, Fairies can take full advantage of this card, like really utilize it to its fullest potential. Zombies can also use it to its fullest potential. It's an amazing card. It's an amazing card. It's as good as the best monster in your graveyard, and oftentimes the best monster in your graveyard is really good. So, because your opponent had to use something to destroy your best monster, and then you just bring it back again, and they're like, well, shit, I'm screwed. You know what I mean? So, yeah, one of the best trap cards in the format, easily. I just think that its power level is just a little bit low, and it's also specifically dead on the first turn of the game more frequently than some of these other trap cards, and that's why it's at number 10. That's it. That's the only reason it's at number 10 and not higher. If this summoned from your deck, oh man, it'd be number 0, you know what I'm saying? But because you need to have that graveyard setup, that's why it's at number 10. All right, speaking of needing setup, Return from the Different Dimension, number 9. This card is unreal. In terms of like raw power level, like this is probably the strongest trap card in the format. Like by far. In terms of like when you're resolving this card, how good it is versus how good every other trap card in the format is. This card has the highest ceiling of any trap card in the format. I should say that. It has the highest ceiling. That being said, similar issues to Call of the Haunted, but even further than that, it's a little bit harder to set up a Banish zone than it is to set up a graveyard. Setting up a graveyard is much easier, obviously, but when you can set up a Banish zone, if your deck does set up the Banish zone really well, and a lot of decks are going to set up the Banish zone just by playing the game. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to play into your opponent's Caiuses, right? You're going to play into your opponent's cards that we'll talk about later in this list. And inherently, your Return from the Different Dimensions is going to be live. Your Malicious, your Plague, your Miracle Fusions, your Mizuki, your Wyverns, you know what I mean? Like, there's just so many ways. Phantom of Chaos sets this up. Vayu sets this up. Necrogarna, Dark Armed. Basically, this card gets inherently set up. Chaos Sorcerer in a lot of different ways. Dimensional Alchemist even. But it does take a little bit more effort because your cards need to get banished. And then you do also have to pay half your life points. So that's the other downside to this card. Unlike some of the other trap cards on this list, the cost is very real. If you activate this card and you somehow don't win the game immediately, then you're now in a dangerous position, and you have to play pretty defensively. So, not the easiest card to use. I'll say that, not the easiest card to use. It does take a little bit of setup, but in terms of raw power level, highest in the format easily. Highest in the format. Like, this card is better than, like, when it's resolving, it's probably more likely to win you the game than any other trap card in the format, which is that's saying something. All right, number 8. Number 8, Dimensional Prison. This card is insane. It's just basically banish anything that's attacking you. It gets everything off your back except for a few cards like Arcus, Thought Ruler, Obelisk the Tormentor, you know. Like, there's a few cards that don't really get hurt by this, Jinzo, in a sense, but yeah, generic banish anything with no cost is just really, really strong. Like, when you get down to those low resource situations, there's a lot of removal in Edison format. This is one of the best removal to top deck in low resource situations. This is one of the best cards to set turn 1 behind a Raikou, the Lightsworn Hunter, because oftentimes your opponent will summon like a Goblin Zombie or a Dandelion or a Vayu, and they'll try to attack into your Raikou to force that Raikou to be used on a monster that wants to be in the graveyard. And in those circumstances, Deep Prison is literally the best card because it just banishes that monster. They don't hit the graveyard. Now your opponent can't set a back row, or else your Raikou can hunt down that back row. And yeah, it's just one of the best opening trap cards, and it's one of the best late game top deck trap cards. It's pretty much good at every stage of the game, unless your opponent starts not attacking you, or the meta shifts to like not attacking and like more flip effect monsters. And even then it's like, it's kind of a guarantee that your opponent isn't going to attack you and that you're going to have time to set up for your powerful late game. So I think this card definitely warrants the number 8 slot. Number 7, I'm going to talk about it in tandem, is Mirror Force. This card is functionally the same as Deep Prison. It doesn't banish, but it can hit more than one card, and it is format defining. Because of Mirror Force's existence, people will play around Mirror Force more often because it's more devastating to get hit by Mirror Force, and as a result, they will play into Deep Prison. So these cards, their existence in the format at the same time, definitely help each other out. Like, they boost each other up. Like, normally I would rank, if only one of these cards was in the format, like let's just say only Deep Prison's in the format or only Mirror Force is in the format, I would actually rank them below Return and Call of the Haunted, right? Because if only Deep Prison was in the format, all of a sudden Return from the Different Dimension is amazing. Or if only Mirror Force is in the format, all of a sudden Call of the Haunted is amazing. You know what I mean? And on top of that, like, they influence the way people play, right? Like, do I make a Stardust before the battle phase to play around Mirror Force? Or do I make a Thought Ruler before the battle phase to play around Deep Prison? Those are the questions people have to ask because both of these cards exist at the same time. I would rank them around the same area. I think Mirror Force is more often than not a little bit better, and it is more format defining than Deep Prison because it can hit 2 monsters and it forces your opponent to not get super aggressive into 2 back row, or not into 2 back row, into back row with 2 monsters because they can risk losing card advantage, which is like a big deal. It's a big deal in this format. Not only card advantage, but summons as well, card tempo, and like that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think Mirror Force is a little bit better than Deep Prison. I rank them around the same area, and they basically help you survive. They're good early, they're good late. Just great cards. You can't go wrong including these in your deck. I've played decks with 3 Deep Prison and Mirror Force in it, and you know, it's, even if it is like somewhat filler to do that, it's like, it's not the worst thing you can have in your deck at any point. It's not the worst thing you can have in your deck. All right. Next card, number 6, Starlight Road. Look at this beautiful, oh my gosh, I could zoom in on this a bit more. Look at the texture on this bad boy. Beautiful. OCG, Ultimate Rare Starlight Road. Please, Konami. Please, I am begging you. OTS US pack. I want an Ultimate Starlight Road so badly. I know we're probably getting the collector's rare in like the thing that they're doing later on this year, but like, come on, look how clean this looks. Look how awesome this looks. Yeah, speaking of format defining, this card just like, yeah, it punishes people for playing Black Rose Dragon, JD, Heavy Storm, you know, Mirror Force, Torrential, all of the mass destruction effects immediately get reversaled by this card, which is just terrifying. I love this card. I think this is like one of my personal favorite trap cards in the format because it creates like this dynamic, right? It creates a dynamic in the format where it's like, I can bluff Starlight Road by setting multiple really quickly. It creates this like information war, basically. Oh god, I'm gonna get canceled for that one, aren't I? Oh shit. I'm not editing this, but no, I'm just kidding. I'm just playing. Yeah, Starlight Road is fucking disgusting. And then also on top of that, like, it gets to summon Stardust Dragon, baby. Like, Stardust Dragon's so boss, dude. Stardust Dragon's the fucking shit. No, this card's great. It lets you play back row decks. I feel like back row decks would be really shit if Starlight Road didn't exist. And it also lets you play belligerently, aggressively into back row. So it not only helps you protect your own back row, but it helps you protect your dudes. if you're going to get aggressive. It lets you be aggressive. It lets you be defensive. It helps improve decks when they're trying to do either of those two things. It's great early. If it resolves, it does win you the game. I think this is second, in my opinion, second to Return from the Different Dimension. The amount of games that you resolve Starlight Road that you win are very high. Like, if you resolve Starlight Road, you're probably winning. Like, it's like a 90%, I would say 90% chance to win that game. That's how good this card is. And on top of that, I think this card is live a lot more frequently than Return from the Different Dimension is. It's much easier to activate this card on turn 2 and immediately win the game. Whereas with regards to Return from the Different Dimension, it's not as easy to get a turn 2 return win. It's possible, don't get me wrong, but it's not as easy as it is with Starlight Road. Starlight Road's just great. I mean, it's format defining. If you've played this format, you'll understand why running into Starlight is like, it's like, oh my gosh, dude, it's the worst feeling. Like, playing Heavy Storm and then getting roaded is like, it is probably the worst feeling -1 in the game. It defends against Heavy Storm. That's the reason why this card exists. It's one of the only trap cards on this list that can defend you against Heavy Storm while also shifting the tides in your favor. We'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, definitely a number 6 pick for me. I think it is a stronger trap card than the other ones in this top 10. And it is more format defining, I think, than even Mirror Force, which is crazy to say. But yeah, Starlight Road's definitely up there for me. All right, top five. You guys have made it this far. I'm proud of you guys. Thank you for tuning into the video, of course. Yes, number 5. I know, this may come as a surprise to some of you guys. You were probably expecting this to be number 1. But no, this is, in my opinion, the 5th best trap card in the format. Trap Dust Shoot. Yes, this is the most frustrating trap card in the format to get hit with. I will say, it is the most tilting experience to get Trap Dust Shoot on turn 1 of the game. Alright? I understand that. But that being said, Trap Dust Shoot is not always good, right? It doesn't have that deprison factor where it's like always going to be decent. It doesn't have that like auto win factor in a lot of cases, even when you are resolving at turn 1. It doesn't feel as like crushing as Starlight Road. You know, it is frustrating, it is annoying, but it doesn't immediately win the game as often as those cards do. And I know that's crazy to say, but like, I tracked a lot of my matches, my most recent matches, and I was looking at the amount of times I resolved Trap Dust Shoot versus the amount of times I resolved Starlight Road. And the amount of times I resolved Starlight Road, I won more than the amount of times I resolved Trap Dust Shoot. That being said, I do think it is a top 5 trap card in this format. Nothing really attacks the hand in this format except for Trap Dust Shoot as effectively. It's a very, very unique effect. It's great against a wide variety of decks. It can be dead in the middle to late game when you're top decking. It can be dead if your opponent has no monsters in their hand, or they have a ton of monsters and you just take one of them and it just didn't matter. It doesn't impact the board, but the value of information in Edison format is so much that I think that this has to be a number 5. This has to be a number 5 pick for me. It's a really good card. It's a really, really good card, and it's banned today. I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh's different today, and it probably should have been banned in Edison format too. But that being said, definitely a frustrating card. Definitely a high roll card. Like, if you open with it, like, your win percentage goes up really, really high. If you draw it in the middle to late game, it doesn't help you nearly as much, because at that point in the game, you should have a good idea of what's happening already. You should kind of know what's going on, or your opponent just might have 3 or less cards in their hand because they've played the game in a certain way. It's also not that good against the most popular decks, Blackwings and Heroes. It's not very good against those decks. So it has some meta issues right now specifically, but yeah, this card's great. There's obviously a long list of negatives. I will say one thing about Trap Dust Shoot. If I had to say one thing about it, it really is only as good as your pressure. If you Trap Dust Shoot someone and you don't put them under an amount of pressure, then they're just going to draw more cards over the course of a longer game, and it's going to invalidate that Trap Dust Shoot. But if you Trap Dust Shoot someone and you have a fast clock, you're going to win that game. So it's only as good as your pressure, and it's only as good as the deck that it's in. And it's usually only good on like the first few turns of the game, unless you're playing a deck like Fairies, in which you can play a Drago matchup and then inevitably win. So I think Trap Dust Shoot it's a little bit more, it has a higher variance than a lot of the trap cards on this top 10 list, but the ceiling is really, really high. It's definitely, it's not as high, I think, as Road or Return, but it's just under those. I think it's number 3 in terms of like raw I win the game potential. All right, number 4 is Solemn Judgement. Solemn Judgement, I had some difficulty placing this because similar to Trap Dust Shoot, it's also not always live. So, I mean, it is always live. It is always live, but it's not always good, is what I meant to say. Like, yeah, in some matchups, like let's say you're playing the Blackwing Mirror, if you stop an Icarus Attack, you feel like a legend, right? But if you're spending 4,000 life points to stop a normal summon, it doesn't always feel that great. It doesn't always feel that great. But that being said, despite the steep cost, this card is a one card answer anything. It's busted. It's absolutely busted. It's one of those few cards that just like it really does do everything. Like it stops everything. If it was at 3, I feel like it would change the dynamic of the format. It's one of those cards that you can't really play around. You kind of just have to play into it. Earlier when I was talking about Starlight Road, I said that Starlight Road is the only card that can punish your opponent for playing Heavy Storm. Solemn Judgement kind of does that. It can stop Heavy Storm, but at the cost of a lot of life points. Usually your opponent's okay with the Typhoon on Solemn, but pay a lot of life points. But that being said, it does stop Heavy Storm. So like it actually interacts with it in a way that's favorable. It stops like draw spells at +1. It stops Icarus Attack at +1. It stops Phoenix Wing at +1. It stops Miracle Fusion. It stops Caius. It stops everything. It just stops everything. It says no. He just says no. He just cancels you. He says you're canceled. You can't play. Yeah, I think this card is definitely an easy number 4 for me. It's just above Trap Dust Shoot. I think the number of games I open Solemn Judgement doesn't feel super good. Honestly, okay, I don't know. Maybe I could switch it with Trap Dust Shoot. Maybe Trap Dust Shoot is number 4. Maybe Trap Dust Shoot is number 4 because I feel like they have the opposite problem, right? I feel like they have the opposite problem where Trap Dust Shoot, if I draw it late, it sucks. But Solemn Judgement, if I draw it early, it sucks. That being said, Solemn Judgement is basically always live, whereas Trap Dust Shoot isn't always live. So that's kind of why I have Solemn Judgement higher. We're really splitting hairs here. These cards are like pretty insane, like power level. It's kind of hard to compare them. I think Trap Dust Shoot is probably a little bit better than Solemn Judgement just because of the inherent win factor. But the fact that you can dead draw Trap Dust Shoot versus the fact that you can't dead draw Solemn Judgement, I value that activity. I value that activity more than most players would. So that's why I have Solemn Judgement at number 4. I don't really know. Anyway, number 3. Number 3. The third best trap card in the format. Bottomless Trap Hole. This card's crazy. This card is crazy. This card is oftentimes Solemn Judgement, but it banishes the card that gets summoned. And yes, this card's just great. It's format defining. It basically says like if you're going to play big monsters, you're always going to have to play around this card or you're going to run into it. It's part of the reason decks like Flamvel are not tier 1 decks. It's part of the reason Blackwings doesn't just run over the entire format. It's part of the reason most decks have game. And that's why I think this card is so good. It puts your deck on the same level as tier 1 decks in the format. It puts your deck on the same level as like, you know, a deck that maybe has a more powerful inherent strategy. This card, it levels the playing field. It makes it so that there's a much more diverse number of decks that can play. It's format defining. Yeah, it just does everything similar to Deep Prison. It's very rarely dead. This is more often dead than Deep Prison because again, the monster has to have 1500 or more attack, but like cost-free summon stops that banish, that's pretty nuts. That's pretty nuts. This card later gets limited. It is semi-limited in Edison format. That is one of the drawbacks of it. You don't get to play the full 3. But yeah, it's like part of the reason why like Breaker the Magical Warrior doesn't see a lot of play. It's part of the reason why like there are certain cards like Machina Fortress that are kept in check by cards like this specifically. Yeah, no, this card's just really, really fucking good. I think within the context of Edison format, it is a more powerful card than Solemn Judgement and Trap Dust Shoot. I think within the context, because it adds something to every deck, you know, and it improves your matchups against the best decks. Like if your opponent goes Dark Arm Dragon, priority activate, you chain Bottomless, you answer Dark Arm Dragon, and you banish it, so they can't get it back, you know. banishes Judgment Dragon, banishes Bionic. It stops like everything. Banishes Christia so it doesn't come back, you know? It stops everything that like matters. It stops everything that matters except Stardust. Kinda. It doesn't stop Black Rose Dragon either. And it does it cost free. It doesn't cost you life points. It's great early. It's really good late. It helps you against Gladiator Beasts. It helps you against like a lot of those like aggro decks. Heroes it's good against. You know, banish the Alias. Their Hero Blast is dead. You know, their Miracle Fusions get dead if their monster gets banished. It's just a really good card. And it's definitely a pillar of the format. It has to take the number 3 slot for me. I think this card is easily better than the previous cards on this list. In terms of like what it does for the format. In terms of the context of the format, I think this card is definitely up there for me in the top 3. Number 2, Royal Oppression. Yeah, this card's ridiculous. This card is just ridiculous. It says we are going to play a fair game. And if my fair game is better than yours, I win. And this card is it's just a gift that keeps on giving, right? It's oftentimes Solemn Judgement that costs 800 that also lets you threaten further Solemn Judgments as well. It is double-sided. But like the amount that this card warps a format, it stops Starlight Road, it stops Call the Hunt to Return. On top of that, it stops Synchros at +2. It stops Dark Arm before they can activate it, JD before they can activate it. It just stops everything. It stops everything that is scary. And then if you can play a sort of really solid grounded game, like decks like Black Wings or Fairies or Dragons, in my opinion, top 3 decks, Vayu Turbo, even Lightsworn can play this card. As long as you just like mill a wolf and you have a wolf in play and then you flip Royal Oppression, all of a sudden it completely warps the game that you're playing. It's kind of like Scheherazade or whatever that card is in Magic the Gathering where it's like, okay, we're playing a different game now. Like now that Royal Oppression is in play, it's like, okay, we were playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And now we're playing Yugi Kaiba. You know, it's like we were playing Edison, but now we're playing a different format. It's like we're playing a sub game within a game, and that's just how powerful Royal Oppression is. It like completely changes the pace of the game when it's flipped up. Card is very rarely dead as long as you have action, you know, as long as your monsters are chilling, as long as your monsters are solid, then Royal Oppression is very rarely dead. Like your opponent will be forced to play into it. Most decks play into Royal Oppression. Like even the decks that you think wouldn't, like Frogs, play into Royal Oppression. It stops Miracle Fusion, which is like one of the pillars of the format. It stops Synchro Summoning, which is obviously just this huge like part of the format, like just ridiculous. It shuts off zombies completely. It shuts off there's some decks that just like can't play under this card. It's very difficult for them to play. It's even good against like dragons, good against shit. It fucking stops Future Fusion, stops. I could go on. I could go on with how much this card does for the format. If your deck can play this card, it should. I think that's it. I don't think you should think about it. I don't think you should overthink it. Maybe there are some meta games where it's worth siding it instead of maining it. I don't really know. I think even in the matchups where it's quote unquote bad, like Black Wings and Vayu Turbo, it's still good because it's still a card that stops Dark Arm Dragon and stops them from synchroing and stops them from, you know, using Plague in the Vayu Turbo deck. And I just think that this card is so good that even in the cases where it's bad, it's still good. That's how insane it is because it just yeah, I don't know. I don't even know what to say about this. This card is so insane that like I was memeing with my friend one night and I was like, yo, I have this Dragon Link deck and I was like, let's play Edison versus Dragon Link, like as a meme. And he was playing Black Wings and he flipped Royal Oppression. And I was like, wait, hold up. This card just beats my modern Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Like that's how insane this card is. Like that's how fucking crazy this card. I like in terms of power level, like oh dude, I could go on. I could write a book about this card. Holy shit. All right, let's get to number 1. Let's move on. Shout out MMF. All right. Number 1, Torrential Tribute. Yeah, I had a buddy of mine who put this into words a little while ago. He said Dark Hole is banned, but Torrential Tribute is legal. Make it make sense. Because Torrential Tribute is just flash Dark Hole. It's literally just flash Dark Hole. And on top of that, in a format with turn player priority on ignition effects, it's even better in a lot of cases. So, yeah, this card's ridiculous. This card is ridiculous. This card basically says, like, if you ever commit a second monster, you have to be scared. Always. You have to be scared of this card if you ever want to commit a second monster. And that is even more scary, in my opinion, than Royal Oppression. Torrential Tribute is in my opinion, the number 1 best trap card in this format. within the context of this format, I think it defines the format more than any other trap card, because how often are you summoning a second monster? You know what I mean? Like, how often are you committing a second monster to play? Every single game that happens. Every single game you have to think about Torrential Tribute. Every single game in Edison format you have to think about this card, which is why this card is so good. You can't go a game without thinking about it. You can't go a game without thinking about playing around it. It is always at the top of the list of like thinking about what your opponent could potentially have. And then on top of that, it's like the easiest card to just get a blowout and win the game. Like, it's the easiest card to get a 2-for-1 with. It's the easiest card to reversal your opponent with, and like totally flip a position, or neutralize a position. It's a card that you can always threaten once your opponent knows about it. Once it's gone, it totally changes the dynamic of the game. Yeah, it's like Mirror Force on steroids. It's like Dark Hole on steroids. I think it's easily better than Dark Hole, for a lot of reasons. I think it's just a crazy card. It's just a crazy card to have in any format. I've always loved this card because it's like just the concept of it, like the destructive power of water. Like, that's just it's a cool concept to me. Like, from a design standpoint, it's like, yeah, like torrential, like just this huge like burst of water. And it reminds me that, like, you know, it reminds me of things like tidal waves. It reminds me of things like how water can actually destroy, like in the same way it brings life. I don't know. I'm getting into some like metaphysical shit right now. I'm on some like guru shit right now. But like, yeah, Torrential Tribute, like, beautiful card, amazing collector's rare. I got nothing but good things to say about this card. It's almost never bad. It's only ever bad when your opponent has Starlight Road and when they have Stardust Dragon. That's literally it. Like, it's a good card in every other circumstance. Yes, it does destroy your own monsters, but like, let's be real. Like, if you're not playing to set up this card, then yeah, I don't know. And if you have monsters in play, like, how do I say it? How do I say this? If you have monsters in play, Torrential Tribute is just like insurance. It's like, okay, if my monsters die by natural causes, right? Like, your opponent destroys them, spends cards on them. If they try to put their monsters down, you have Torrential Tribute. So it's like, even if your monsters are in play, you can just play the game naturally. And then if it comes to the circumstance where your monsters get destroyed, then your Torrential Tribute will bring you back into the game, because your opponent will have to commit in order to destroy your monsters. So yeah, no, this card's just always good. It's always live. It's always amazing. You have to think about it as early as turn 1. You have to play around it as early as turn 1 with every deck. Literally every deck has to think about this card. And it's amazing. It's good against all the best matchups. It's good, or not best matchups, best decks. It's good against Blackwings. It's good against Fairies. It's good against Dragons. It's good against literally zombies. It's good against everything. It's just an insane card. It's Flash Dark Hole. Like, I don't know how to say it other than that. It's in my opinion, it's easily the single best trap card in the format, just in terms of like what it does for the format, like what it contributes to the format, what it means to the format, like how it shapes the format. Stopping summons has always been like the strongest effect in Yu-Gi-Oh, because summons is the choke point in Yu-Gi-Oh. Summons is like, okay, I have one of these per turn, and if that gets stopped, I no longer have a turn. And that's why Torrential Tribute is so good. It can stop not only one summon, but multiple. It can stop special summons or normal summons. It can end your opponent's turn. It can end the game in your favor. And it's easy number 1 pick for me. I think the top 10, there's some ordering issues. I think maybe with like Solemn and Dust Shoot, they could be like flipped around. Bottomless could maybe be switched with those. I think that's like 3 through 5 is interesting, but number 1 and number 2 is easily Torrential and Royal Oppression for me. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. It ended up being a little bit longer than I thought it would be, but I think I talked about, you know, some cool stuff in the format. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.